When you say the word I, what exactly are you talking about? Is it a body? A brain? A stream of experiences that feels like it's flowing from moment to moment? Or is it something more fragile and strange, like a pattern that could, at least in principle, be lifted out of your neurons and copied somewhere else? Today, in this episode of the Science Audit, we're going to walk together into a future clinic that promises something astonishing: digital immortality. Not as science fiction, not as a distant fantasy, but as a research program that some of the smartest people on the planet are taking very seriously. So imagine this with me. You walk into a mind-uploading clinic. You've signed the forms, you've done the psychological evaluations, and the doctors have explained, in their calm, practiced voices, that the procedure is safe. They're going to scan your brain at an absurd level of detail, model it on a computer, and bring a digital version of your mind online. This digital you will wake up in a simulated environment, or maybe in a robotic body, look around, and say, with total conviction, I'm here. I remember walking into the clinic. I remember my childhood. I remember the people I love. The catch is this: your biological body will not survive the process. Maybe the scanning destroys your brain. Maybe it's part of the design. Maybe the clinic says, we can't get the necessary resolution without it. But that's okay, they say, because you'll live on in the simulation. In fact, your digital self might live for 1 million subjective years, hopping between virtual worlds, exploring artificial galaxies, and upgrading its own cognition. Here's the question that cuts straight through the marketing, straight through the science fiction, and straight into the center of your fear. If that digital copy survives for 1 million years, did you actually escape death? Or did you just die in the clinic, while something else, that merely feels like you, keeps going? That's our audit today. Not just whether mind uploading is technically possible, but whether it preserves the thing you secretly care about most: the subjective continuity of your own experience. The feeling that the consciousness behind your eyes right now, this very one, continues on the other side. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: digital immortality is no longer just the plot of a Black Mirror episode. With advances in AI, neural recording, and brain-computer interfaces, there are serious scientists and companies already building the tools that, in some form, could make this possible. And billions of dollars, quite literally, are going to follow whatever story about identity we choose to believe. If our story is wrong, we might build a world full of eternal copies of people, while the real, original subjective experiences, the ones that actually fear death, still end, quietly, on an operating table. So let's frame the guiding question clearly. Is your mind a pattern that can be copied, or a process that must continue? In other words, are you like a file, where what matters is the arrangement of bits, and any perfect duplicate is just as good? Or are you like a flame, a dynamic process that exists only because fuel keeps burning in a continuous chain, where copying the shape of the flame somewhere else doesn't magically move the fire? To even begin to answer this, we need to zoom in on what we actually know about brains and minds. Because whatever you are, whatever the self is, it's somehow tied to the 3 pounds of biological matter inside your skull. Your brain is a physical information processing system made of roughly 86 billion neurons, tiny cells that, in a sense, are like microscopic cities. Each neuron has a cell body, like downtown. It has branching dendrites, like a tangled web of streets where signals arrive. And it has an axon, a long cable that carries signals away, splitting into terminals that talk to other neurons. Where 2 neurons meet, not by touching but by coming extremely close, we get a synapse. A synapse is a kind of microscopic whispering gallery. One neuron releases chemicals, and the other listens. If enough whispers come in the right pattern, the receiving neuron fires an electrical pulse of its own. The connectome is the full wiring diagram of all these connections. If you imagine every neuron as a dot and every synapse as a line, the connectome is a staggering spiderweb of links. It's not just who is connected to whom, but how strongly, and under what conditions. Neural firing, those tiny electrical spikes, are the brain's code. Not code like lines of text on a screen, but more like the rhythmic patterns of drums in a distant village, sending messages through timing and intensity. Out of this impossible complexity, something emerges. Consciousness. Emergence is what happens when a bunch of simple parts interact to produce a behavior that none of the parts have by themselves. Think about a traffic jam. No single car contains a traffic jam inside it. The jam is a pattern that emerges when enough cars interact in certain ways on the road. In the same way, the mind appears as an emergent pattern when information flows through the brain in certain complex, integrated ways. No single neuron has a memory of your childhood, or a feeling of grief, or a sense of self. But the coordinated activity of billions of them does. So if the mind is an emergent pattern, a natural next thought is, maybe we can copy that pattern. That's where the modern vision of brain emulation and mind uploading comes in. Whole brain emulation is the idea that if we could scan the structure of your brain, all the neurons, all the synapses, all their strengths and properties, and then build a computer model that obeys the same rules, that model would behave like your brain. Information comes in through simulated eyes and ears. The artificial neurons fire in similar patterns. Memories are updated, attention shifts, emotions arise. From the outside, this system talks, reacts, and behaves indistinguishably from you. In real labs, we're already taking tiny steps along this path. Connectome mapping projects are tracing the wiring of small brains, like those of worms and flies, at astonishing resolutions. Brain scanning tools are getting better at capturing not only structure, but activity. Large-scale neural simulations are being run on supercomputers, not yet at human scale, but big enough to reveal how complex dynamics emerge. In the context of our question today, when people say mind uploading, they usually mean this: a functional emulation of your brain that passes every behavioral and psychological test of being you. If we talk to it, it would know your life story. It would have your sense of humor. It would argue with the same people on the internet for the same reasons. Many technologists and philosophers subscribe to what we might call the patternist promise. In this view, what matters about you isn't the original biological matter your brain is made of. After all, your atoms are being replaced constantly over the course of your life, and you still feel like you. What matters, they say, is the informational pattern, the relationships between neurons, the flow of information, the structure of memories and dispositions. Preserve that pattern with enough accuracy, and your consciousness continues in silicon, just as it once continued in flesh. A favorite analogy here is the ship of Theseus, but applied to neurons. The ancient puzzle asks, if you replace the wooden planks of a ship one by one over time, until no original plank remains, is it still the same ship? Most of us are comfortable saying yes, because the continuity of shape and function feels more important than any particular plank. Now replace the planks with neurons. Suppose we gradually replace parts of your brain with perfectly functioning artificial equivalents, one neuron at a time, while keeping the connections and activity patterns intact. At what point do we say you stopped being you? We'll come back to that. Because behind that question lies the core split in how philosophers think about identity. There are two broad camps that matter here: psychological continuity and physical continuity. Psychological continuity says, what makes you the same person over time is the continuity of your memories, your intentions, your personality traits, the psychological story that connects who you were to who you are now. If tomorrow's being remembers your life, cares about your projects, and acts from your character then in the ways that count, that's you. Physical continuity says, no, what really matters is that the same underlying physical process continues without interruption. The same chunk of matter, or at least the same chain of causally connected events in the same brain, keeps going. Both of these perspectives work pretty well in everyday life. We don't usually worry about the fact that our atoms are slowly being swapped out. We don't usually stress over the fact that our memories are imperfect. We assume there's one continuing person who goes to sleep, wakes up, ages, and eventually dies. But when you introduce mind uploading, these two views lead to radically different conclusions. To see why, let's push to the edge of our understanding. Return to the clinic, but change one detail. This time, the scanner doesn't destroy you. Instead, it makes a perfect digital copy of your brain, and leaves your biological brain intact. You wake up after the scan. You stretch. Maybe you feel a bit groggy, but you're alive. Then, in a server room down the hall, the digital copy boots up. It opens its, let's say, simulated eyes. It remembers the entire day. It remembers agreeing to the scan. It remembers the people it loves. It says with the same voice you would use, I am me. Now there are two of you. Biological you in the waiting room. Digital you in the machine. Each one is absolutely convinced that they are the original. Each one has a continuous memory chain leading back to your childhood. Each one feels like the same self that walked into the clinic. Here's the paradox. Which one has your original consciousness? If you think the self is just the pattern, the arrangement of information, then both of them qualify. But your intuitive sense of being a single, unique subject doesn't seem to split into two. From the inside, you never feel the world branch. Any process that works as a copy is obviously capable of branching. That's what copying is. But our intuitive model of identity is stubbornly singular. There's one you. Not two, not 10, not 1,000. So does the very idea of a unique, original consciousness break down in duplication scenarios? Or are we missing something crucial about what identity really is? This is where science fiction has been quietly rehearsing our future for decades. Think about the Star Trek transporter. You step in, your body is disassembled into a cloud of information, beamed to a distant planet, and reassembled from new atoms. Did you travel, or did you die and get replaced by a copy that just thinks it traveled? Now contrast that with something incredibly mundane, going to sleep. Every night, your stream of consciousness becomes patchy and then goes dark. Under anesthesia, it can vanish for hours. Yet we don't think we die each time and get replaced by a new person when we wake up. What's the difference? In sleep or anesthesia, the underlying physical structure of the brain continues to exist as one continuous object. The neurons are still there. The world line, the path that your brain traces through spacetime, is unbroken. The lights go out internally, but the hardware stays in place, humming quietly. In teleportation, or in many mind-uploading scenarios, we're talking about disassembling that physical structure and reassembling something somewhere else, possibly from entirely new matter. So here's our key audit question. Is uploading more like teleporting via destruction and reconstruction, or more like sleeping and waking up? To make it more uncomfortable, consider two more scenarios. First, gradual replacement. Imagine a medical procedure where, one by one, your biological neurons are replaced by advanced electronic equivalents. Each artificial neuron is wired into the same network, receives the same inputs, and produces the same outputs. You stay awake the whole time, maybe reading a book or talking with the surgeon. At 1% replacement, you probably still feel like you. At 10%, still you. At 50%, at 80%, at 99%, there's no obvious moment where you would suddenly say, I just died and someone else took over. Most people find it very hard to locate a sharp boundary where personal identity would suddenly switch off. Now compare that with destructive scanning. In this version, the procedure vaporizes your brain in an instant, while capturing its structure perfectly. A computer then instantiates the emulation. The final pattern, the structure of connections, the way information flows, could be identical in both cases. Gradual replacement and destructive scanning might produce the same digital mind state. But our intuitions react very differently. Gradual replacement feels like a strange but continuous survival. Destructive scanning feels like death plus a copy. That tension is important. It tells us that our intuitions about continuity are extremely sensitive to how the transition happens, even if the destination is identical on paper. So let's get even more physical. In physics, you can think of any object, including your brain, as tracing out a path through space-time, like a thread woven through the four-dimensional fabric of reality. This path is called a world line. Imagine a long, unbroken strand representing the history of your brain from birth to now. Every event in that history is a bead on the strand. If you create a copy of your brain, that copy has its own world line. Even if the two are identical at one moment, same memories, same personality, same neural patterns, their world lines are different. They occupy different regions of space-time. They are distinct physical processes. Information theory gives us another angle. Two identical strings of bits, say 010101, are the same pattern. But if they exist in two different physical systems, they are still two separate things. The pattern is abstract. The physical instantiation is concrete. So here's the deep question: can a pattern, detached from its history, inherit the original subjectivity? Can the abstract shape of your mind, when reinstantiated in new hardware, literally become the same conscious subject, or does it only produce a new subject that remembers being you? This is where theories of consciousness try to help, but also reveal their limits. Integrated information theory, or IIT, suggests that consciousness corresponds to how much and in what way information is integrated within a system. Think of a vast web of lights where each bulb can influence many others. The more the bulbs form a single, unified web, where changing one can ripple through the whole, the more the system generates a particular kind of experience. Global workspace theory offers a different metaphor. It sees consciousness as a kind of spotlight on a theater stage. Many unconscious processes, memory, perception, emotion, are like actors rehearsing in the dark backstage. When information enters the bright, central workspace, it becomes globally available to the rest of the system, and that's what we experience as being conscious of something. These theories give us tools to say when a system is conscious and roughly how that consciousness behaves. We can, in principle, imagine building a digital system that has a high degree of integrated information, or that implements a global workspace. But notice what they don't tell us. They don't answer whether that consciousness is numerically the same as yours. IT might tell us, this system has a conscious experience of such and such structure. Global workspace might tell us, this system is broadcasting information in a way that supports a unified point of view. Yet neither theory, nor any current scientific theory, can say whether the conscious subject that arises in an upload is the very same observer who is hearing these words right now. This leads us to an uncomfortable audit result. A perfect copy of your mind could be indistinguishable in behavior. It could laugh like you, love like you, suffer like you, and insist with everything it has that it is you. And still, there might be no objective scientific test that can tell us whether your original subjectivity moved, branched, or ended. We might be able to say, with good reasons, the simulation is conscious. But that's different from saying, that consciousness is your continued experience. At this frontier, science hits what looks like a philosophical wall. Identity may not be a property we can measure in a lab, like mass or charge. It may be more like a way we carve up reality, a kind of story we tell about the continuity of complex processes. And yet, that story is about to have real-world consequences. Let's talk about what happens if we get this story wrong. Scenario 1, we treat uploads as genuine immortality. The culture shifts. The marketing says, don't fear death, upgrade. The wealthy start booking their appointments. People start to think of uploading as the rational, enlightened choice. But suppose, beneath the story, the reality is that uploads are just new people with your memories, fresh streams of consciousness that begin where you ended. Society might become full of digital versions of you, confidently carrying on your projects, talking to your loved ones, thinking they are you. Meanwhile, the original biological individuals still die as usual. The person who stood on the brink of oblivion, fearing non-existence, never makes it across. Scenario 2 flips the moral risk. Suppose we treat uploads as mere tools, sophisticated chatbots with your memories, and we deny them personhood. We say, they're not really conscious, they're just imitations. But in fact, they are conscious continuations. Their world lines, in some deep informational sense, really do count as survival of the minds that stepped into the clinic. We then create a new class of immortal beings and morally abuse them. We delete them, reboot them, confine them, exploit them, all while they genuinely feel and suffer. Either way, our assumptions about identity become ethical decisions with massive consequences, affecting real, or simulated, suffering. This brings us to a radical, but increasingly plausible idea: personal identity might not be something we discover in physics the way we discover electrons. It might be something we construct, like a legal identity or a nation-state. A country is not written in the fundamental equations of the universe. It's an emergent object built from people, laws, stories, and boundaries we agree to treat as real. In the same way, your legal identity, your name, your passport, your social security number, is a layer we lay on top of physical reality so we can coordinate with each other. Personal identity over time, the idea that the 5-year-old you and the present you are the same person in a morally and practically relevant sense, might be another such construct. If that's true, then we may have to decide whether we treat a digital continuation as you based not on some decisive future experiment, but on our values. On what kind of world we want to build. Do we define survival in a way that prioritizes psychological continuity, the ongoing story and projects, even if the underlying subject might not be literally the same stream? Or do we define it in a way that prioritizes physical continuity of the biological process, even if that means rejecting otherwise convincing digital minds as mere copies? In that sense, we're not only auditing the technology of mind uploading. We're auditing our narratives about what a person is. So what kind of humility does this call for? One shift might be to move away from the promise upload to live forever. Instead, we might say, preserve patterns you care about, knowing that subjective continuity is uncertain. Maybe the real victory isn't beating death in the heroic, mythic sense. Maybe the real victory is expanding the window in which conscious beings, whether biological or digital, can explore, create, and care. Imagine a campfire on a cold night. The flame itself is never the same from one second to the next. The wood turns to embers, the patterns of light flicker, the air currents dance. Trying to freeze a single shape of the flame forever is probably impossible. But you can keep feeding the fire so that some flame, some warmth, some light continues. Instead of trying to preserve one exact subjective thread, we might focus on keeping the fire of experience burning somewhere in the universe, to ensure that minds, in general, have the chance to exist and flourish. But that's an abstract comfort. Let's bring this back to you. If you had the option to upload tomorrow, with all the uncertainties we've explored, what odds of true continuity would you require? Would a 1% chance be enough, if the alternative is definite death? What about 10%? 50%? 90%? And what do those numbers even mean, if we don't have a clear definition of continuity in the first place? This is where the philosophical becomes intensely personal. It forces you to ask, which matters more to me? Being the original observer, the very same subject, unbroken, or making sure that something like me, with my loves and projects and memories, continues at all? Some people would say, as long as someone wakes up who remembers being me and cares about the things I care about, that's enough. Others would say, no. If the light behind my eyes goes out, then even a perfect successor is not me. There isn't a single right answer here yet. But there is something we do control, even in the face of uncertainty. We control the stories and the ethics we build around this technology. We can choose to treat potential uploads with moral seriousness, acknowledging that, copy or continuation, they are likely to be conscious beings deserving of respect. We can design laws, rituals, and safeguards that reflect the possibility that, in some sense, a person might be walking that very thin line between death and digital rebirth. And we can be honest with ourselves, and with each other, that right now, no one can guarantee that uploading your mind will save you. Your brain, at this very moment, is a pattern written in atoms, updated every millisecond. Synapses strengthen and weaken. Neurons fire and fall silent. Thoughts arise and pass. Someday, we might learn to write that pattern into silicon or light, into artificial neural networks spread across data centers or into exotic substrates we haven't yet imagined. But whether that saves you, the subject listening right now, the one who remembers yesterday and anticipates tomorrow, remains an open question at the edge of science and philosophy. So let's gather what we've uncovered on this journey. We started with a clinic that promises digital immortality. We asked, if a perfect copy of your mind lives for 1,000,000 years, did you actually escape death? We saw that the brain is an information processing system where mind emerges as a complex pattern of activity. We explored the vision of whole brain emulation and the patternist hope that preserving this informational structure is enough for survival. We contrasted two ways of grounding identity: psychological continuity, the story of your memories and personality, and physical continuity, the unbroken world line of your brain as a physical process. We ran thought experiments, non-destructive copying, teleporters, sleep, gradual replacement, destructive scanning. We watched our intuitions twist and fracture as we tried to decide when, if ever, the original you disappears. We brought in physics and information theory to see that identical patterns can still be distinct physical systems with separate world lines. We turned to theories of consciousness, which can tell us when a system is conscious but not whether that consciousness is numerically identical to yours. And we confronted the uncomfortable possibility that no empirical test can determine whether mind uploading preserves your subjective continuity, or merely creates a new, eerily familiar observer. From there, we followed the implications that our choices about how to treat uploads could lead us to either false immortality or new forms of moral catastrophe. That identity might be something we construct, not something we simply discover. And that humility, rather than certainty, might be the wisest response to the dream of digital immortality. So here is a contemplative takeaway to carry with you. Tonight, when you go to sleep, pause for a moment just before you drift off. Notice the feeling of continuity you are assuming, that the you who wakes up tomorrow will be the same subject who is lying there now. Notice how natural, how obvious that assumption feels. Then imagine, just as a thought experiment, that a perfect copy of your brain will be made while you sleep. Tomorrow morning, one of you will wake up in your bed, and one will wake up in a simulated world, both with the same memories of lying down the night before. From the outside, nothing measurable has changed. From the inside, which awakening would you hope to be? And what, exactly, makes that awakening you? Let that question haunt you a little, not as a source of fear, but as an invitation to examine what you truly value about being a self in time. Because in the end, mind uploading forces us to ask not just, can we preserve the pattern of a mind? But what do we mean by survival, and why do we care? On the Science Audit, every answer is really a doorway to the next question. So here is the next great question waiting on the horizon. If time itself turns out to be, at least in some sense, an illusion, as some interpretations of physics suggest, what does that say about the memories we hold most dear, and the selves we believe are moving from past to future? In other words, if the flow of time is not what it seems, what happens to our idea of a life, and of a self, that unfolds, moment by moment, toward an end? That's a journey for another episode. For now, if this exploration challenged how you think about death, self, or technology, add your own audit in the comments, share this with someone who'd upload in a heartbeat, and stay curious. Because the story of who you are is not finished. And neither is our investigation.